Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
European leaders have reacted with a flat no to the idea of reopening negotiations over the controversial Irish backstop, despite last night's vote in Parliament. The Prime Minister says there are several possible alternatives to the backstop and she intends to go back to Brussels for talks. The President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, said he would listen to what she had to say, but insisted the Irish backstop was part and parcel of the Brexit deal and would not be changed. Meanwhile, in Westminster, Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn met for the first time to discuss possible ways forward for Brexit. Our political editor Laura Kuensberg reports.
A different kind of meeting in his diary. The Labour leader off to see his biggest rival. The Prime Minister leaving not to wrangle Conservatives, but to talk to him.
Will the EU make any changes?
Tea and biscuits served behind closed doors in her private office in Parliament. But after an hour of talks, did the Prime Minister and the Labour leader find any common ground?
Serious, exploratory on the issues, and I set out the Labour case for a comprehensive customs union with the European Union in order to protect jobs in this country and trade.
The Cabinet's already promised to redraft the arrangements for Northern Ireland. Ministers will consider if the backstop, that insurance policy against a hard border, could have a time limit, or if the UK could leave when it likes.
Backstop will have to change, and the Prime Minister will be negotiating with our European partners to get the very best deal for Britain.
Or that technology could be found to manage the border instead. But even though she won the vote last night...
Questions to the Prime Minister.
The problem, the Prime Minister well knows, is that the EU has said no to all that before.
The majority in this House voted to maintain the commitment to no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, to leave the European Union with a deal, and to set out to the European Union what it will take to ensure that this House can support a deal. That is a change to the backstop.
That means there is, at least for now, a different mood here. Tory backbenchers, more used to tearing each other apart over Brexit, for once backing her, if she can get Brussels to budge.
Tell the European Union there is a majority in this House for that deal, and I would ask my colleagues to give the Prime Minister space. They're not going to crumble tomorrow. We're going to have to hold our nerve, and we can be successful.
Remember, the Prime Minister only narrowly got this place on side last night because she made a promise that she would get part of her Brexit deal changed. But wanting something to happen and making it happen are very different things.
And as far as the EU's top brass are concerned, at least in public, all 28 countries shook hands on the agreement, including the so-called backstop. So a deal is a deal for now.
The withdrawal agreement remains the best and only deal possible. The European Union said so in November. We said so in December. The withdrawal agreement will not be renegotiated.
There's no hiding their irritation.
Is that the way you can solve a problem of a magnitude? Is that the way to do that? Is that the way you do that? That is every day changing your opinion?
Listening to that, it's hard to imagine there's any mood to give the Prime Minister what she wants fast. But if there is to be a deal, one side or the other, in the end, will have to give.
And Laura joins us now from Westminster. How much progress has actually been made?
Well, Sophie, on the face of it, the Prime Minister's still stuck in what seems an absolutely impossible situation. But it matters that she is now finally, you might think, having talks and actual dialogue with the leader of the opposition. Because in the end, it may well be Labour votes that actually come to her rescue if there's a deal that has a chance of getting through the House of Parliament. It matters too that late last night she managed to, for the first time in many months, actually get the two warring sides of the Tory party behind her. Yes, united in saying that they didn't like one crucial part of her deal, but actually managing to agree on something nonetheless. So those two things are factors that have changed, and they are factors that will help the Prime Minister in the next few difficult days and weeks. Whether or not she's trying to achieve something that is realistic is an entirely different question. But as far as number 10 is concerned, it might not be enormous progress, but they are making tiny steps forward.
Laura, thank you. So clearly a difficult road ahead for the Prime Minister. What are her options and how long has she got left to try to sort it all out? Our Deputy Political Editor John Pienaar has been trying to find out.
Theresa May's won a little more time. Her hopes of a last-ditch Brexit breakthrough haven't died yet. Her problems, though, are still piled high. Her directions from MPs, the ones she wanted, unpicking the plan she agreed for managing the Irish border, the so-called backstop plan that she insisted till yesterday was the best she could get, and getting the EU to abandon demands they're still standing by. Well, judge for yourself. Just now, it looks almost like Mrs May's mission impossible, here and in talks with EU leaders. In Europe, obstacles wherever she turns. First, is there any way round the now famous Irish backstop? That would keep the UK under EU customs rules and Northern Ireland closer to avoid stops and checks on the EU's Irish border. That's if there's no final trade deal ready after any Brexit transition time. MPs want Mrs May to agree an alternative, but Brussels says there isn't one. Back home, of course, Brexiteers and the DUP say checks could happen away from the border. Trade could be tracked with new systems, new technology. Getting round the backstop might unlock a deal, but Brussels says the technology doesn't exist. And even if the EU gave ground, and there's no sign of that, reopening the Brexit divorce deal could open up new problems. Spain could renew its claims on Gibraltar. France might veto any new deal. The EU is clear it would shift position if Mrs May went for a Brexit closer to Europe, staying under EU customs rules, say. But that's not a true Brexit, according to Mrs May. And anyway, just imagine the reaction of Brexiteers back at Westminster. Mrs May will be back in the Commons in around a fortnight, and it could be tough. If she can't win concessions from the EU, Brexiteers are still threatening to vote down her deal. Other critics on all sides could well try again to take control of Brexit, force her to delay Brexit Day on March the 29th. And next time, unhappy ministers might resign and join the rebellion. As things stand, Mrs May will be back in the Commons, reporting a deal if she somehow, against all the odds, gets one next month. And if no deal's agreed, she'll report that to MPs, a day ahead of a big debate and crucial votes the next day, Valentine's Day. Though don't expect much affection in the House between rival factions, rival parties, or for that matter towards Mrs May, if Britain seems closer to the outcome that many fear, a no-deal Brexit.
John Pienaar there. Well, all eyes are on the Irish border and how to solve the issue of the backstop. Ireland will be one of the EU states most affected after Brexit, given that it shares a land border with the UK and relies heavily on its trading relationship with Britain. Our Ireland correspondent Emma Vardy's been to Dublin to see how people and businesses are preparing.
At Ireland's biggest port, they're not hanging around to see what kind of Brexit we'll end up with. Work is already underway to be ready for a potential no deal.
So we've set about building the infrastructure for that, and by the 29th of March this year we will have spent €30 million in Dublin Port, and there will be changes to supply chains which would shift goods from one trade route to another trade route. We can't be in any way definitive about what that might look like. Other than that, it will be much less efficient.
At the moment, goods coming from Britain into Dublin Port can leave almost immediately. But now new inspection posts are being built and hundreds of extra customs officials are being recruited. If we leave the single market and customs union, the process for British goods arriving here could change. This is a glimpse of the post-Brexit future, because after we leave the EU, the lorries will come off the ferries and drive into this newly constructed area for the additional customs and regulatory checks to take place. After last night's vote, the Irish government issued its starkest economic warning yet, saying Brexit could cost Ireland 50,000 jobs and a 4% cut in GDP.
We've looked at the opportunity to stockpile some ingredients and to stockpile some finished products both here and in the UK. In the case of ingredients, there are limits to what we can do. A no-deal exit at the end of March would be a disaster for this business, and it will be a disaster for the entire Irish food industry.
This Brexit roadshow is helping businesses prepare. But while the Irish backstop, the plan to avoid a hard border, stands in the way of a deal, the future's unclear for everyone.
we've been doing a lot of preparation, but we still don't know what we're doing the preparation for.
Get rid of the backstop comes the message from Westminster's Brexiteers, but Ireland's holding firm.
I'm very sorry for Theresa May, but it seems to me that the unity of the Conservative Party has become more important than anything else.
Do you think Ireland should agree to an alternative now on the backstop?
No, I don't, because I think that the principles are kind of clear, and I don't see why it's then the job of the Irish to to cave in.
Still, pressure on Ireland grows as the British government asks for a lifeline that it argues keeps everyone afloat. Emma Vardy, BBC News, Dublin.
Let's speak now to our Europe editor, Katja Adler, in Brussels. The Prime Minister says she is going to head to Brussels for talks, but does a no mean no from Brussels?
Well, it would seem so, Sophie, for now at least. I mean, take today, for example. There was so much passion in the Brexit debate here in the European Parliament today. The EU wants to avoid a no-deal Brexit, Sophie. They want to maintain strong relations with the UK. But wherever you look at the moment, you hear and see EU leaders saying no to reopening the withdrawal agreement, which includes the backstop on the Irish border. I mean, EU leaders in the capitals are effectively stonewalling the Prime Minister at the moment, not engaging with her, not hastily convening an emergency Brexit summit of EU leaders, not recognising her self-imposed two-week deadline to get changes to the Brexit deal. And the EU basically hopes that by putting the Prime Minister under pressure, by effectively squeezing her, they'll encourage her to look elsewhere for another means of getting the Brexit deal passed without touching the delicate Irish border issue. Now, of course, Sophie, with brinkmanship like this, every day brings us ever closer to the possibility of a no-deal Brexit. So it is possible further down the line that the EU will blink in some way over the Irish backstop, but very, very, very unlikely in any way that the EU would consider could endanger the Good Friday Agreement or the EU single market.
Katja Adler in Brussels, thank you.
The message was clear from Europe today. There will be no renegotiation of the Brexit deal. 24 hours after Theresa May won the backing of MPs to go back to Brussels and change the agreement, that plan is once again facing wholesale rejection. Instead, EU leaders say they're standing firm, restating that discussions on the Irish border issue remain closed. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister finally meets with Jeremy Corbyn for talks. We'll hear more about that in a moment, but first, here's our Europe editor, James Mates.
A blanket of snow enveloped the European Parliament in Brussels this afternoon, but even that couldn't match the chill with which the overnight news from London was received here. Even as Downing Street was naming the negotiators to be dispatched across the Channel, mandated to renegotiate and rewrite the withdrawal agreement, those they'd have to talk to were saying such talks aren't going to happen.
Are you ready to sit down with British negotiators and start all this over again?
The position of the European Union is very clear. It has been expressed yesterday by the President Tusk, and the President Juncker will make a statement to the Parliament this afternoon. So thank you very much.
The Parliament itself is crucial to these talks. It must ratify any deal, and it won't if there's no backstop to ensure no hard border in Ireland. But as the Commission President explained, it's unlikely anyone here will ask them to.
I have the impression that some hope that the 26 other countries will abandon the backstop, and so Ireland at the last minute. But this is not a game. Ireland's border is Europe's border, and it is our union's priority.
If Mrs May does come to Brussels this week or next, she will certainly be received with all diplomatic niceties. But what, some are asking, would be the point?
She's always welcome. For what? To do what? Is it to change the red lines that the British government has used from day one? That could be a breakthrough.
Many in Europe who fear they are going to lose the blame game in the coming weeks will have welcomed Nigel Farage's acceptance that Britain had quite recently been on board with the backstop idea.
Mrs May has set herself a formidable task to reopen a deal that took 18 months to put together, with people who insist they won't reopen it. And even if that succeeds, to get into place new arrangements that will satisfy Dublin, 26 other capitals, and this European Parliament here, all in less than 2 weeks. No wonder some here are wondering whether this isn't really about managing the delicate Brexit endgame in her own parliament back in Westminster. James Mates, ITV News at the European Parliament in Brussels.
Well, Europe may have dismissed the idea of more negotiation on the Brexit deal, but Jeremy Corbyn met Theresa May today after previously spurning her invitation for talks. According to Labour, there was a useful exchange of views. Our political correspondent, Romilly Weeks, has more.
The Prime Minister stepped out today with the unusual sensation of having her party behind her. But with the EU doing its best to rein on any outbreak of optimism, she wasn't heading to Brussels to reopen talks, just to a long-delayed meeting with
Jeremy Corbyn! Looking forward to meeting the Prime Minister later on today. Because I want to put forward Labour's alternatives, which could command a majority in this House.
Last night, a majority in this House voted to maintain the commitment to no hard border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, to leave the European Union with a deal, and to set out to the European Union what it will take to ensure that this House can support a deal. That is a change to the backstop. That is what I will be taking back to the European Union. He has opposed every move by this government to get a deal. He's the one who's risking no deal.
Having warmed up with those attacks, the Labour leader said he'd use the private meeting to give the Prime Minister this warning.
The last words I said to her was, don't bring no deal back to Parliament because it's not acceptable. That is not a sensible or serious way of going forward.
The meeting was described as useful, but the Prime Minister's priority is still to renegotiate the backstop, the insurance policy to avoid having border checks on the island of Ireland. The government will ask the EU to look at alternative arrangements, including a time limit on the backstop, a unilateral exit clause, or a new compromise plan involving technological solutions.
I do not know what those alternative arrangements are. We've been down that track before, and I don't believe that such alternative arrangements exist.
Brexiters think the pressure of time will help the EU come up with some.
If they keep taking an intransigent approach, a stubborn approach, a computer says no approach, we'll leave on the 29th of March on WTO terms.
It's a high-stakes game. The Prime Minister has 2 weeks to unpick a deal 2 years in the making. She's put all her eggs on winning over her party. She may yet find without Labour's support, she's still marooned. Romilly Weeks, ITV News.
Our political editor, Robert Peston, joins me now from the ITV studios where he's preparing for his programme. Robert, will the Prime Minister's meeting with Jeremy Corbyn have achieved anything today?
Well, I think Jeremy Corbyn assumed that the meeting would just be the Prime Minister going through the motions, but he felt, I understand, that she was genuinely listening to his proposal for a customs union and sort of partial membership of Europe's single market. And in a sense, that's rational for her because she knows that these talks with the EU are going to be very difficult and she may end up coming back with a deal that many of her own MPs, those who backed her yesterday, will end up not supporting. So there may well yet, according to Labour officials, be a deal put to Parliament that Labour could support. Now, there's another really interesting thing about today's meeting between the Prime Minister and Jeremy Corbyn, which is who he took with him. Two senior aides, Seamus Milne and Carrie Murphy, who hate the idea of a referendum. He didn't take his Brexit Secretary, Keir Starmer, who would rather like a referendum. So, for me, the significance of all of this is Labour may end up backing a Brexit deal and Jeremy Corbyn still wants a referendum like a hole in the head.
Robert, thank you. And don't...
There is only one deal, and that deal won't be changed. The message from the European Commission President to Britain today, dealing a blow to Theresa May's hopes of negotiating an alternative arrangement for the Irish border after Brexit. Mrs May met the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn this afternoon for talks on the future described as a useful exchange of views, although Europe's chief negotiator said he hoped the meeting would lead to something more than only eating biscuits and drinking tea. With just 58 days to go till Brexit, our political editor Gary Gibbon is here. What's going on?
Well, what's going on is what Theresa May told us would go on. Remember when she used to back her deal, she said that was because the EU wouldn't accept anything else. And now that she's not backing her deal, but what her opponents wanted, funny enough, the EU is turning around and saying on cue exactly what she said they would say, which is forget it. And what some people close to the Prime Minister are saying is don't give up yet. There could be something in terms of some sort of consolation about how the backstop is temporary, something more solid that allows people who are slightly inclined to climb down from the positions they've got to in the House of Commons, allows them to climb down, but don't expect anything very soon, because there is a real feeling in Europe that they want to sit there silently and make Theresa May sweat it out for a while first, I think, before there is any engagement. It really doesn't feel as though there's going to be much engagement this week. How much engagement we actually get even next week, a moot point. But what we're in for right now is a period of real brinkmanship, and there will be an awful lot of talk about no deal because, of course, the Prime Minister is backing this policy which she told us would never work.
Jeremy Corbyn, with Labour's chief whip, walks across Parliament for a private meeting on Brexit with the Prime Minister. He'd finally accepted Theresa May's invitation for talks, going through the door to her office in the House of Commons, the day after she formally switched tactics and signed up to her Tory backbench rebels agenda, binning chunks of her own deal, potentially. It was far from clear the two would have much common ground. And there was little to suggest that 3 hours earlier when Jeremy Corbyn asked in the Commons chamber what her new plan was.
Could she set out today what these alternative arrangements might be?
Proposals such as unilateral exit mechanism or a time limit to the backstop, and the political declaration already references alternative arrangements and raises a number of issues that can be proposals that can be addressed, such as mutual recognition of trusted trader schemes.
Jeremy Corbyn! None of that was very clear to me. I don't know about anybody else. The Prime Minister may have succeeded in temporarily uniting her very divided party. But, Mr. Speaker, is she willing to make compromises necessary that are more important, and that is to unite the country on a going forward to secure jobs and living standards right across the UK?
Prime Minister!
Can I say to the right honourable gentleman, he's a fine one to talk about coming together when it was only last night that he agreed to actually meet me to talk about these issues.
Across the Channel in Brussels, there was a defiant reaction to Theresa May's demand that the central chunk of the withdrawal agreement she negotiated and promoted must now be rewritten.
The withdrawal agreement remains the best and only deal possible. The debate and votes in the House of Commons yesterday do not change that. The withdrawal agreement will not be renegotiated.
In Dublin too, the idea of renegotiating along the lines of the amendment backed by Tory and DUP MPs last night was dismissed.
In terms of the Brady Amendment, it speaks of alternative arrangements. I do not know what those alternative arrangements are. We've been down that track before. And I don't believe that such alternative arrangements exist.
And I would ask my colleagues to give the Prime Minister space. They're not going to crumble tomorrow. We're going to have to hold our nerve, and we can be successful.
Prime Minister!
Can I say to my right honourable friend, he is absolutely right about the importance of the vote that took place last night.
Jean-Claude Juncker's turned round, Michel Barnier as well. The Irish, the Germans have all said absolutely not up for renegotiation. Is this a very short-lived project?
Well, there are others already in Europe who are saying differently, that they believe that they need to listen to the Prime Minister and
like
look
who?
to. Sorry, do that again. It's somebody I can't pronounce is the answer. There's both. I can try and find out for you. So there's a member of Merkel's cabinet and there's a poll. There are some in Europe, including leading German politicians, who are saying that actually they do need to listen to Theresa May. And what Europe has been saying to us consistently is for Parliament to show what it wants. That is what happened last night.
Tory backbenchers like John Whittingdale did get backing for their demand for a right to exit the backstop from Jeremy Corbyn, speaking after his meeting with Theresa May.
She listened. I listened to her replies, of course. And we then discussed various issues surrounding the problems of the backstop, which she is going to talk to the EU about. And I pointed out that this would be the first time in British history we'd entered into an arrangement with, a treaty arrangement with anybody else in which there was no right to leave, because it would be a decision that could be made only by the other side. And she's heard these arguments before.
She certainly has, but mainly from the pro-Brexit Tory MPs who tried to kill off her premiership with a vote of confidence last month.
The ayes to the right, 317.
Last night, though, the pressure was on some of the pro-Remain wing of the party, refusing to back Theresa May's shift on Brexit. The chief whip turned on former Education Secretary Justine Greening. He gestured with his hand. "We are this close to being out of power," he said. Justine Greening paused, then, as he walked away, called out, "It's your fault for being so rubbish." Pro-Remain Tories have already started plotting how they might bite back after last night's setback, regrouping to try to force a delay or shift in policy on a leader they feel has lurched right.
Well, here in Brussels, I have to say the resounding chorus to Theresa May's proposal has been a no, although with a few dissenting voices, and those in London rummaging around for dissent may point to the occasional German politician here or there. I mean, overwhelmingly, the evidence is that they're not going to give in to Theresa May's demands. In fact, they're even wondering why on earth she's coming here. But then, as Gary said, they're also going to be holding firm for the next 2 weeks, sitting on their hands and watching London squirm, as one of them put it to me here. At the same time, there's quite a lot of exasperation that all those 18 months of hard labour, which resulted in 585 pages of that withdrawal agreement, that Michel Barnier was parading around like a newborn baby, well, all that, frankly, is ancient and rather bitter history by now. The question really in everyone's mind here is, how much longer can we put up with this? Brexit calls again. Witness the post-prandial stampede into the European Parliament for a special debate on what the hell happens next. Theresa May is promising or threatening to come back to Brussels to try and ditch the backstop. Should they agree? Pick your language.
Nej, det synes jeg ikke. Nej. No is nej.
No renegotiating of this treaty right now.
No.
No.
Nej.
No.
Nej, no.
Do you think the backstop should be renegotiated? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, why?
Because I think it could be better. I think it could be worked out much better.
A rare yes in a day of no's. Brexit has become a bit like this powerful Hoover, noisy and sucking up everything. So here they were again, the EU's Brexit steering group, navigating the corridors of power with another London-induced political hangover. What is the point of Theresa May coming to Brussels if you're not going to open up the withdrawal agreement?
I don't think there is room to do that for the simple reason that the backstop is absolutely needed, and this backstop is in the withdrawal agreement, but there is a possibility to discuss the future relationship.
There are Tories who still think you're going to blink on the backstop.
I think the backstop is an insurance, and an insurance is needed to be 100% sure that there is no border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, and we don't want ourselves that the backstop is used. This is, like I said, a guarantee, a safeguard. But it depends a lot on what the future relationship will be. If this future relationship, for example, is a customs union, that makes it completely different.
But the UK and the customs union could be as magical thinking as ending the backstop. They huddled for an hour and then faced the inevitable question. Mr. Barnier, is a no-deal scenario now the most likely?
The only point I want to make is to confirm that the EU institutions remain united. And we stand by the agreement we have negotiated with the UK, never against the UK. Thank you very much.
You're not going to blink. But the bad blood is rising, and this from the longest-serving MEP, a veteran of 4 decades of jousting with London.
I'm only
in despair when I look to the House of Commons and this government, which has not one constructive idea together, which has a majority.
They love teachable artwork here. This one is called Unity Through Diversity. Shake one piece and the whole thing rattles. Again, a bit like Brexit and the EU.
Das ist die Strategie.
A perfect backdrop for speaking to the embodiment of Anglo-German goodwill, David McAllister, close ally of Angela Merkel, son of a British officer and a German music teacher.
Our red lines are that we have to protect the integrity of the single market and that we want to avoid a hard border between Northern Ireland and the Republic under all circumstances. And that's why we were working for 18 months on this withdrawal agreement. And it's such a pity that in the moment we only have a majority of people who are saying no to what we have negotiated together with the British.
You sound exasperated.
No, I will always respect the United Kingdom. I have a British passport since I was born. I love this country. I love the four nations of the United Kingdom. It's just so sad.
Sad, bewildered and yet determined. The Brexit mood in Brussels. Well, let's bring in another prominent voice here in Brussels to do with Brexit. Philip Lamberts, MEP, head of the Green faction and, of course, member of the Brexit Steering Committee. Thanks for coming on this rather freezing roof here in the middle of Brussels.
Welcome to Brussels.
So there are still people in London, in fact, probably an increasing number of people after last night's vote, who think that you lot will blink in 2 weeks' time. That basically your hard position at the moment regarding the backstop will eventually change when faced with a cliff edge. True or not true?
I don't think it's true. The fact is that the EU27 know where their interests lie, and what is asked of us by the vote last night in Westminster is basically to forget about the backstop. But actually, what that would mean, if you want to avoid a border in Ireland, would be to open up a 550-kilometre backdoor into the single market, which equates to negating the single market and destroying it. So just as if the United Kingdom would open its doors not to goods but to people without controlling them. That cannot be accepted by the Europeans. So yes, no deal Brexit would have a cost for the Europeans, not just for the UK. But the cost of the destruction of the single market would be an order of magnitude bigger.
Are you genuinely worried that the invisible border on the island of Ireland will become a kind of smuggler's paradise, that we're going to force chlorinated chickens on the European market, on the single market in the future?
Well, if I have to listen to some of the hard Brexiteers, absolutely. I mean, the likes of Boris Johnson have basically done their utmost to destroy trust. They want to make the United Kingdom a paradise for multinationals, basically reducing social, environmental, health standards. And then they would like basically us to open that border without any checks. They must be out of their minds.
Are you being a bit paranoid about that?
Paranoid? You know how business works? Well, I know because I've worked in a multinational for 22 years. And it's not just the UK. If I were a third country multinational and I know that this backdoor exists, I would certainly invest in the UK so that I can channel goods within the single market without a free trade agreement.
But if there is no agreement, if Britain crashes out of the EU, leaves without a deal, then the very thing that everyone is trying to avoid, the hard border on the island of Ireland, will become a reality.
I know, but it's going to be the UK's fault. I mean, it was the UK's sovereign decision to say, okay, we quit, forgetting that actually the UK is bound by the Good Friday Agreement. And so if the UK removes one of the bases of the Good Friday Agreement, that is its membership of the EU, then it has to replace that with something else. And that something else is the backstop.
But you're going to feel the pain as well, aren't you? I mean, you know, the German car industry is having a bad time at the moment. Germany's teetering on recession. One German senior politician said this would be like a Lehman's shock to the European economy.
Let's not overemphasize that. Would that be painful for the EU27? Absolutely. But again, destroying the single market would be even more harmful. It's really a question of, that's the calculus. And when people bank on us blinking, look at what happened with Greece. When we had the Greek crisis, ultimately what drove the decision was keeping the integrity of the monetary union. This time it's going to be the integrity of the single market.
In 5 seconds, is a no-deal scenario now the most likely, yes or no?
I think it's the most likely at the moment, absolutely.
Philip Lamberts, thank you very much indeed. A very sobering line there from one of the senior politicians in this city dealing with the Brexit business. Back to you in London.
Matt, thanks very much.
Matt was talking there about the return of a hard Irish border, and across the Atlantic, a US congressman has put forward a bill opposing that very eventuality. Brendan Boyle, who has Irish ancestry, said he was concerned that a hard border could threaten the Good Friday Agreement. I spoke to him earlier in Washington and asked what he was hoping to achieve.
Myself and a number of us want to make clear that the United States is still engaged diplomatically in this issue, the same way we were in the 1990s when we first kicked off the peace process by appointing George Mitchell to be the special envoy.
I mean, the Prime Minister, Theresa May, would say she is absolutely committed to the Good Friday Agreement and that she, too, doesn't want to see a return of a hard border, and that's why she's trying to get a deal to avoid that. What do you say to that?
Well, I appreciate those words, and I appreciate the sentiment, but it also has to be in writing. The fact that a backstop was agreed to, in fact, I believe it was even Theresa May and her government's idea. She goes to Brussels, signs up to it, and then last night in the UK Parliament advocates that it be rescinded. That does not exactly instill a great deal of confidence, certainly not here in Washington.
Do you sympathise at all with Theresa May in that she's caught between a rock, you know, in the shape of the EU, and a hard place, her own party? Do you have any sort of human sympathy for her?
As a politician, I have sympathy for anyone who would be in her position, and I think that she's someone who's attempting to soldier on and do what she thinks the right thing. However, I have far more sympathy for the family members of the 3,500 lives that were lost during the Troubles, and want to do everything in my position possible to make sure we never return to those bad old days. And make no mistake about it, a hard border would likely bring them back.
I mean, the former Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, suggested that we're all sort of getting too hung up on this issue of the Northern Ireland border. I mean, he described it as a gnat, the Irish border problem, and he compared a border crossing to travelling between two different districts in London. I mean, what do you make of that?
That is almost an insulting comment. I don't think peace in Ireland is a gnat. It's a shame that Boris Johnson seems to have that view. That certainly isn't the view here on Capitol Hill, and it shouldn't, frankly, be the view anywhere.
Well, how do you think Theresa May herself is viewed as a potential trading partner, someone you're going to enter negotiations with over the next few years after Brexit, you hope?
Well, I'm not going to personalize this to the Prime Minister. I have great respect for her, indeed all of the members involved. I'll just say that anytime you're entering a negotiation, trust is critical. The ability to say tomorrow what you agreed to today is critical. So when you sign up to an agreement and then you renege and you advocate for an amendment that takes away the critical part of that agreement, that does not exactly inspire confidence.
Your president might say, you know, the art of the deal is playing tough, and maybe that's exactly what Theresa May is doing.
I'll leave my Trump comments for another day. I'm a Democratic member of Congress, and I haven't exactly been shy about my disagreements with President Trump. I'll simply say that this situation is complex enough.
Brendan Boyle, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, back to Brexit now, and a High Court judge has approved a scheme by Barclays to move 190 billion euros in assets to Ireland amid the Brexit no-deal uncertainty. The bank had argued that it could not wait any longer. Our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, is with me to explain.
Chris, I mean, this is important because it's showing a British company being forced to press the red button on its contingency no-deal plans. I mean, put quite frankly, time is running out. And Barclays, like other banks, had hoped that a deal would give them legal cover for their historical transactions. In a no-deal scenario, of course, there's no such guarantee. And the result is that Barclays is now trying to move 190 billion euros from the UK to Ireland. The High Court approved that after Barclays insisted it simply could not wait any longer. Now, I spoke to their chairman, John McFarlane, earlier this afternoon, and he said they had to be prepared because there still isn't any clarity. He told me they have to be conservative and plan for an exit in March.
So is this just an accounting exercise? Or
they haven't moved the money quite yet. This is just the permission so far, but it still represents a huge outflow, and Barclays isn't the only player here. It's estimated that financial institutions have shifted £800 billion of assets ahead of Brexit. Now, when it comes to Barclays, most of what's going is derivatives, and this activity activity represents huge amounts of profits, and profits mean huge amounts of tax revenues. And tonight, Krish, it's unclear whether the move will threaten important tax revenues here in the UK. Barclays are very keen to say that they will remain the UK's top 3 taxpayer, but you know, if money moves, then tax might move as well. Just finally, RBS will have its own court ruling about transferring money out on the 22nd of February.
Thanks, Halia. Now, we are as ready as we can be. That's the message from the new boss of the Port of Dover. But less than a month into the job, Doug Bannister has told this programme the government hasn't yet made any practical preparation for the thousands of additional checks which will be required if the UK leaves without a deal. Our business editor Siobhan Kennedy reports from Dover.
A bird's eye view of the free flow of freight, all 10,000 trucks, a day of it.
So, Siobhan, if you really want to see the most intense operation on earth for the management of freight activity, you got to come down to Dover.
Fresh American eyes on Britain's biggest port. The new chief executive, Doug Bannister, may be given to hyperbole, but in Dover's case, he's probably right. Nearly a fifth of the UK's trade in goods enters Britain through this port without so much as a lowered barrier or a raised clipboard. But now the man who came here from the port of Jersey is about to navigate Britain through uncharted waters as we prepare to leave the EU.
So far, while we know the guys and gals across government are working really, really hard on putting programs in place and getting understanding, and not just in the United Kingdom, but also in the European Union as well, about how this is all work, we still don't have firm direction on really what is going to be required.
This is the control centre, the heart of Dover. From up here you can see 2 ships are unloading 250 trucks, but the port here can cope with double that in a single hour. And it's a seamless flow because their exit point through customs is that little grey box down there. And as you can see, under current rules, all these trucks are simply waved through.
Of course, that won't be the case if we leave the EU with no deal and all these trucks suddenly need to be checked. But with no extra space or facilities on site, Mr Bannister's just praying the government understands the risk despite the lack of reassurance.
Is there anything actually physically happening on site here for additional checks?
So what we have received is we've received more what they are attempting to do. We haven't got any physical comfort. We haven't seen increased manpower. We haven't seen any new systems or processes. For us, the most important thing is what are the physical checks on the dock. That will, if those are minimal, then we can maintain operations. If a hard border therefore means that we have to have physical checks on the docks within our estate, then that is going to create a lot of problems for us.
But has the government told you that that is not going to be the case?
No.
Up the road, John James runs a freight firm that has its heart in Europe and is also Dover's biggest customs clearance agent. He's much more cautious and thinks gridlock is inevitable.
We've just been with the new boss of the Port of Dover, who says, without being complacent, that he's done all he can to be prepared. And come what may, Dover will operate on the 29th and 30th of March.
Well, we think it's completely opposite of that. The delays will occur simply because the customs clearance facilities are not in place to clear the cargo after the 29th of March.
Can you cope? Can Dover cope?
Dover won't be able to cope. We won't be able to cope. As I said, it will be an impossible situation.
As for the notion that technology could potentially replace form filling and physical checks, don't bank on that either, says Dover.
It seemed to me to be a very huge task to get it all in, tested and operational before the 29th of March.
I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, it can't happen. Surely, a man of your experience with ports.
It comes down to how they want to treat the border.
And you don't know how they want to treat the border?
No, we don't.
The government says, and last night even voted, to avoid a no deal and the disruption it would bring to places like Dover. But keeping a lookout is part of the job here. While the boss says he can control processes in his command, it's the politics over the horizon that could make his first few months very difficult indeed.
to Westminster, and just before we came on air, I spoke to two former Whitehall insiders about how the Brexit negotiations have been handled by Britain's politicians and civil servants. Jonathan Powell was Chief of Staff to Tony Blair in Downing Street and was intimately involved in the Northern Ireland peace process. Jill Rutter, who now works at the Institute of Government, has previously worked at the Treasury and Number 10. Jonathan Powell, you have written a furious article, really. I mean, not just about criticising politicians, but really saying Britain has failed in a very fundamental way. Just explain why you think politics has so catastrophically failed.
I think Britain's failed, but the British political class have failed. Most of my work nowadays is abroad, working on conflicts around the world, civil wars. And when I go there and talk to people, they'll talk about their civil war for half an hour, and they turn to me and say, what on earth's happened to Britain? You used to be the cradle of democracy, you used to be the most effective system. You've collapsed. What's happened? And it gives them a sense of perspective. People in real civil wars feeling sorry for us about our division. The system has failed.
But is this just somebody who used to be in power saying, oh, it's not as good as it used to be?
I like to think it's not. I would take my share of the blame for what's happened. I'm part of the political class. I was a civil servant for 14 years and then a political appointee for 13 years. So I take my part of the blame. There is no doubt that the political class has failed, and we're in a very serious moment. It's not just about Brexit, and it won't be cured by Brexit going away.
Jill Rutter, how fundamental do you think the failure politically has been?
The big thing, I think, has been, on Brexit particularly, has been the absolute failure of our system to make decisions. So if you look at the Cabinet is supposed to be able to decide things and come to a realistic way forward. But what we've seen basically since the referendum is a complete paralysis of that normal decision-making process. So it was only in July last year that the Cabinet finally came out with its sort of detailed position about what the UK wanted out of its future relationship. And the trouble for the Prime Minister, that was such a sort of carefully concocted compromise that it was the UK's initial position, but she couldn't move from it. So, and that was a failure to recognise the position we were in. And I think one of the things Jonathan brings out very strongly in his article is a failure to sort of really grasp that you have to encounter reality. You can't make policy in a vacuum. You can't make policy just to keep your party together. You actually have to look at the other side, look at what's going on out there on the ground, and not just be in a lot of denial.
So to what extent do you think the contempt a lot of people hold for party politicians right now is justified?
I think it's,
because reading Jonathan's article, I mean, it is.
It's not a very good look. I mean, I think there's some interesting things. I mean, I think we've seen the emergence of some really quite interesting politicians. We've seen a really interesting shift of power to the backbenchers. I think a lot of select committee chairmen are actually easier to remember who they are than front bench spokespeople. But clearly, neither of our major political parties is managing to come out of Brexit looking good, looking coherent. And that's really because Brexit is such a different problem for them. Because Brexit is not an issue that divides on the normal left-right split. It divides both parties enormously. Neither wants to split the party, so they're both walking tightropes of how far can they go to have a coherent position that doesn't split their party, and we end up with quite incoherent positions.
I mean, you're being quite kind. I mean, Jonathan, you also criticise the civil service and say they should be standing up more to point things out that are wrong.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, I make it very clear, I don't blame the civil service for what's happened. It is the failure of the government and the failure of the opposition, which neither opposes nor is any way competent or a competent alternative government. But I think the civil service has made two mistakes. One is its inability to carry the weight when government fails like this. If you think of the 1970s, when we had revolving door governments, we had constant political crisis, the era of yes minister, then the civil service provided the continuity when government failed. This time it's not doing it. The second thing it's not doing is it's not telling the Prime Minister when she is chasing unicorns. They really should have told her at the beginning what Europe would accept and what Europe wouldn't accept. It wasn't a mystery. I would know what they would accept and what they wouldn't accept.
Like yesterday, you mean?
Yes, exactly. Why do they not tell her? There is no way the backstop is going to be subject to a time limit. It cannot be, because it's not a backstop. She knows that, but she united her party just for one day to do that.
What has happened?
I think it's really interesting, and I think this is where I think Jonathan and Tony Blair do have to pick up a bit of the blame, because I think one of the effects of those 13 years of Labour government is the civil service really lost confidence about its role as the principal policy advisor, and there was a very big shift.
Because it was being bossed around by special advisors.
Ministers made it very clear that actually they saw their primary source of advice on policy within government was their special advisor, the people they brought in from outside, and they really weren't that interested in the civil services policy advice. Instead, the civil service was relegated, if you like, to an execution role.
Jonathan Powell, if the two-party system is not working, is failing so fundamentally, what is the answer? I mean, it sounds as if you're laying the groundwork for a new type of political movement.
Well, what I suggest at the end of the article is that if we had had a collapse of the government and a collapse of the opposition, and if there haven't been this rising up of new political talent of the form that Churchill provided in 1939 to provide an alternative leader, then maybe what we actually want is a government of national unity, just as in dealing with the Second World War, when Churchill and Attlee came together to govern the country in the national interest after a crisis. Maybe that's what we need to build on.
Who could lead that?
Well, we need to give someone a chance to actually come and do it, but certainly not the two current leaders.
Can you see that as a possibility with this crop?
It's quite difficult because I think one of the things we saw yesterday was that party loyalties still run quite deep. I think it's really, really interesting if the Prime Minister's attempt to go off to Brussels and renegotiate is as unsuccessful as I think Jonathan expects it will be, and Parliament has to come and confront this again on the 14th of February. What does that do? Does that really start to sort of shatter some of those party loyalties and see these sort of nascent groupings really, really coming together?
Right. Jill Russell from the Institute of Government and Jonathan Powell, whose article they were discussing is actually in the New Statesman from tomorrow.